I think so. Hello, Maju.
Hi everyone.
Hello.
Okay, so we're gonna just wait 2 more minutes, see who's gonna join, maybe send a reminder on the group. And then
I sent one a little while ago. I'll send another right now.
yeah, but if it's an intimate conversation, then this is beautiful. I like intimate conversation. Hello, Nejma. Thank you for being here. Yes, Simran, okay. More people are.
Hello. Hello, Amanda.
Yay, man wins. Oh, Ishtar, the suspense is killing me. Can I just ask you, man? We are recording, so we will share this, and I'm sure people will come in as we go, but just so we can make the most of our welcome, everybody. This is Ishtar. I'm so excited. Ishtar, man.
Yeah, I know faces here.
You know faces.
I was gonna say you're both in Cape Town too. Or no, you're in Johannesburg, sorry. Very
Okay,
cool.
the floor is yours. The floor is yours.
The floor is mine. Hi everyone. So good to see your faces. Some familiar, some not. I'm Ishtar. I will be speaking a little bit about, we'll be having a conversation around artistic activism, creative activism for narrative change. I am based in Cape Town in South Africa, and I've been working a long time as an activist in various struggles and movements, generally around gender-based violence and more in terms of sex worker rights in South Africa. And so that's where my experience is coming from. Currently, I'm a free radical. So I am a freelance working with a range of social movements, organizations, institutions, funders, all around kind of creative activism and kind of creative approaches to human rights advocacy, but in very different sectors. Before I start, I have a question that I would like to pose to a couple of people in this group. I don't know a lot of this group, but I know if you're here and the kinds of work you're doing, you give a shit. You give a shit about a particular issue. You want to change stuff. And the question I have is, what made you give a shit? What made you care? What made you want to create some sort of change? I'm fairly certain none of you came out the womb going, I'm going to dedicate my life to this particular social justice or environmental justice issue, or I am kind of going to start a revolution. Like something happened in your life at some point in time that made you give a shit. And I'm interested to know what that was. It could have been a moment, it could have been witnessing something. I don't know. I mean, for me, for example, if I think back, it was definitely around my childhood. I was raised in quite a kind of radical feminist household, and I remembered that every time I went to my grandmother's house, there was always tension between my parents and my grandmother. And I couldn't figure out what it was. And I only figured out that kind of later what it was. And it was because I was being asked to like go straight into the kitchen. And my brother like could just chill. And my parents were always having fights with my grandmother because like that's not how we do in our household. Like both of us must learn how to cook or both of us must chill. So that for me was like my first instinct of, something's not quite right with this world. And then I explored it further and further as I got older and deeper. So I'm just wondering if would anyone kind of just volunteer what was there like, this made me give a shit moment.
Oh, I want to go. Can I answer the question?
Do you?
So there were two moments. The first one was the height of fees must fall here in South Africa. I'm at Stellenbosch. It's in the middle of tear gas and throwing and all sorts of things. And everyone around me was crying. And I was just like, the caucasity of these white Afrikaners. Ne? Then the second point was I'm sitting in a postgraduate class learning about international relations theory, and the head of the political science department is teaching us about Aristotle, but teaching us about Aristotle uncritically. And so I then ask, but here I am as a whole Black person and female doing the thing Aristotle says I cannot do. How dare you teach me Aristotle like I cannot think rationally? And I saw the man discombobulate and not have an answer. So those two things together bored me. It bored me. This is boring. It's boring. So I'm here because I must show you how to do things properly. When people are not humaning properly, it's boring. It's boring.
Amazing. Anyone else? What is that moment that made you kind of give a shit and do what you do?
I think it's quite interesting that you would ask this question, Ish, because I think I was 20, it was old. I was 25 or 24, and I was working for this little NGO working out of Wits University. And I was just feeling a lot of angst that I couldn't quite place. And I got into a cab the one day, and there were these two Black lesbians called Kwezi and Mpumi from the 1&9 campaign. And I don't even remember what they said, but I don't know, they just ignited something in me. So that was when I was like, okay, I'm going to do the things.
Wonderful. I just spoke to Kwezi Lomso this morning, and this
And
is an artwork from the 1&9 campaign. So our worlds are coming together. Anyone else?
I can share two quickly.
Go for it.
One was from childhood, actually really pretty young. I think I was 5 or 6, and my mom was pretending to be Catholic because she thought that's how she had to like show her spirituality, even though there was like no depth to it. So she'd take me to mass and my dad would stay home. And at one point she asked me if I liked it. And I had already started to notice how strange it was that people would pay to absolve bad things they'd done. Like they could put money in a pot and that made it all better. Or they could like sit there with some beads and say sorry and that made it all better. So I told her that that didn't make any sense to me and I didn't want to go anymore. So that was the first. But then she made me go through like all the things to do up to my first confession, which was the strangest experience I've ever had. So that just like, I was like, the whole like religion piece just didn't make any sense to me. And then the second was in high school, I wrote this very passionate paper about environmentalism and the whole, like, there was this big thing happening in the Pacific Northwest with clear cutting and endangered species. And I wrote this very passionate paper about it. And I got back like a B- because I had spelled environment wrong. And mind you, this was like 1980, I don't know, what was it, 87, 88. And I typed the whole thing out and I had just gotten like one letter wrong on the word. And I was so pissed off that because I got that grade, only because of the spelling error, not my ideas. And I was like, this is total BS that I'm getting dinged on my grade because I spelled it wrong when the passion is there. So those were like two things that just showed me that the systems were not working quite right. Oh.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Anyone else? Go
Yeah.
for it.
When I was, I want to say 7 years old or maybe 10, my father and mother went to a protest in the United States in the South against the death penalty. And I remember like being very confused as to why they were going. Like there was no one that wasn't something that we in our little family were facing or anyone that I knew was facing. And I remember my father explaining to me that that it was our responsibility to care for other people too, and what happened to them as well. So I think that, and being raised in the United States, but always going back to India, like I always had this bigger lens on sort of the world and what my, I guess what my scope of care should have been. Yeah.
Okay. So I could listen to these stories all day, every day. But I have only but an hour to have this conversation. But I love to start off with this question because for me, it is really central to what I do. So I asked this question to thousands of activists all around the world, and they have all told me remarkably similar stories. So stories around feelings, around they were moved by something, they experienced something, they witnessed something. Not one time, okay, from my memory, not one time has someone said, you know what, I signed a petition. I was in a mall and I signed a petition, and then, you know, that motivate me to change my life and dedicate my life to ending gender-based violence. Or, you know, I read this policy and it moved me to give a shit. Or I saw this panel and it just changed everything and I decided to get off my ass and do something. And so for me, what was really important is that this reminds me of why I do what I do and how we should be going about doing change in the world. Because if these tactics didn't move me, why do I think it's going to move others? Not that I'm saying that we shouldn't be doing press releases and policy change and panels and conferences and research. All these things are really, really important in our strive to kind of change the world. But what I'm saying is they're not enough. They need some help. We need to feel something. I see Tiffany's here. I discussed with her a while ago with her class this idea of affect and effect that the Center for Artistic Activism kind of coined. As activists, and I identify as what? Like, we're very effective human beings. We can get shit done. If you wanted a protest outside Parliament tomorrow with 200 people, I could probably organize it in a couple of phone calls. Like, I'm very effective. Artists are very affective people. Like, they can move people with not a lot of words. Like, you can look at a piece of art, you can hear some music, and you can be affected. And I can say this because some of my best friends are artists. Sometimes they're not the most organized, and sometimes they can't, what's the term? They can't organize their way out of a paper bag. I find the magic often happens when you combine artists whose bread and butter is to affect people and activists who effect people. And the Center for Artistic Activism uses this term affect, which is a kind of combination of being able to move people with feelings to an effective end. In our world, it's around changing particular laws or kind of instituting particular policies or changing behavior in various ways. And so what I want to talk to you a little bit about, don't worry, I have slides, but they're mainly for pictures. I don't do a lot of words, it's only pictures, don't worry. But I want to talk to you a little bit about my experience using creative activism strategy and tactics to effect narrative change, particularly in the fight for the decriminalization of sex work in South Africa. So I do a lot of work with SWET, the Sex Workers Education Advocacy Task Force, and Sisonke, which is the National Sex Worker Movement in South Africa. And so we've employed creative activism in different ways to try and shift how people view sex work and the sex industry, as well as how people view sex worker rights and what the legislation should be to ensure that sex workers have access to these rights. So what is creative activism in a nutshell? It's really about applying creative imagination tactically, strategically, organizationally to make activism more effective. It's really playing on the idea that everyone has a creative life they can bring to their activism. So this idea that, oh, I can't draw, I'm not creative. I can't sing, I'm not creative. Like everyone has some sort of creative outlet. Whether it is like you throw an incredible dinner party, that requires creativity. You love fashion, you create an amazing playlist, you like gardening. I have a friend that does amazing things with spreadsheets. Like that's how she expresses herself creatively, through kind of Excel spreadsheets. We all have something creative that we can bring into our space. It really is about long-term change, not a once-off tactic. So it's not around stunt activism. It's not about trying to get as many likes on Facebook or whatever, unless that leads to kind of tangible change in people's lives. And it works on the premise that the truth will not set us free. We all wish that policymakers made evidence-based decisions. Like they look at the evidence and they like, oh, okay, this makes sense. Let's make decisions based on this evidence. But we know that this is not true. The truth is important, but it needs some help. And this is where we use creative activism. And just I'm going to share some lessons and examples of just my experimenting. Am I an expert? No, not at all. But it is something I enjoy. It is a practice I work in and am learning in every single day. And so the first lesson for me in creative activism is know your terrain and use it to your advantage. This sounds familiar because it's also like the first rule of guerrilla warfare. And when it comes to the work we do, it's around culture. We're trying to change hearts and minds. And all of us are working in different cultural contexts, different political contexts, different environmental contexts, different social contexts. And so we need to know our terrain and we need to use it to our advantage. What this looks like for us is, for example, how we do sharing of information with people. We all know at NGOs, we love a pull-up banner. We love to go to a place and put up a little gazebo and our pull-up banner, and we put out a little trestle table and we put our pamphlets, and then we earnestly wait and hope people will take our leaflets, and then we see our leaflets in the bin like closest to us. So we thought, how can we apply creativity? How can we think about information around sex work rights in a different way? Because we know the narratives we're fighting against is like such Hollywood stereotypes that are so strong and embedded in our cultures. And this is something we're perpetually trying to fight against. So this is one of our interventions in handing out pamphlets. This is the wonderful, beautiful, amazing late Rivimbo Tenga. And we set up an Ask a Sex Worker booth on the Sea Point Promenade. And we had the best fun, and we had music, and we gave free hand massages. Because what we've realized is that if someone comes from a hand massage, once you've started on them, you can tell them all you want to know about sex work. You can harass them and tell them all the reasons why we need to decriminalize sex work. They can't go anywhere because they're having a hand massage. So it's a captive audience and they have to listen. So doing things like that are really about personal, intimate connections with people. And this way we found so much more effective in connecting with community members than we would have had we done our usual pull up banner, tent thing, earnest, please will you take our pamphlets? But this works in the religious sector as well. Know your terrain and use it to your advantage. Am I the best person to go into a conservative Christian church and talk about sex worker rights? No. Sometimes we have to think about how to package our messaging. And this was a partnership we had with an incredible pastor, Pastor Alan Story. And this is his church in the middle of Green Market Square in Cape Town. and he practices yellow banner theology. And he was like, let me spread the gospel. And we worked with him for years to kind of make him understand why this was important. And he translated it in a way that we could have never translated it. And so this is just a couple of examples for us about just knowing your terrain and using it to your advantage, whatever that might be. I think a big lesson and takeaway from this is these examples will not work for you because your terrain is different. What people in your community find funny is different. Where people gather in your community might be different, but it's to understand what your terrain is and use it to your advantage. We're at an awkward moment where the sun is like half setting, streaming into my face. So it's going to be like this for a few more minutes. Another big thing for me around creative activism is how do we make the invisible visible? And this is really difficult in a lot of the issues we work on. I'm thinking about climate change as well. It's to so many people, this is an invisible thing. How do we make it visible? I'm thinking around also domestic violence. This is something that happens behind closed doors often. How do we think about these invisible things and making them visible? This is an intervention we did at the 2016 International AIDS Conference. We really wanted to make visible the fact that no one was talking about sex work at an HIV conference. So instead of doing the usual protest thing where we storm the stage and do the things that activists do, we made a very simple sign. It was a clock that counted. You've been talking for however minutes without mentioning sex work. And it just ticked. It just ticked. And as people spoke and as keynote speakers spoke, it just went 14 minutes, 15 minutes, and you could feel the tension because what we want to do is create feelings. Felt the tension. Finally, the third speaker mentioned sex work. The entire, that is the International Conference Center. They had to stop because there was an ovation for about 4 minutes. And what we found out afterwards was that speakers were changing their speeches, like behind to include sex work, because no one wanted to be called out in this kind of way. And it was a way of saying, listen, we're not going to shout at you. We're not going to tell you you're being bad, but we're going to bring to your attention something that maybe you don't know. And what happens is when they say the word sex work, it folds in and says, thank you. And so this for us was far more effective way of changing how people spoke about sex work, thought about sex work in a different kind of more fun way. Same with games. We create kind of role-playing games that we make members of parliament do before we have an intervention with them. Because at the end of the day for us, it's about what you were talking about earlier. How do we create feelings? How do we move people to want to change? And you move people to want to change by making them experience something, by making them witness something. And so these are our attempts at trying to do that. Instead of just whacking them over the head with large amounts of research, which we have, and policy recommendations. This is something we don't often think that we have space to do, especially when you work on pretty serious issues, is like being seriously funny. Especially working in sex worker rights, this is not a space where often we don't think about humor when we think about the rights of sex workers. But we try make things funny. This was an installation we created that we kind of haunted our Deputy Minister of Justice with. Because we were waiting for the release of a paper that was never coming, and that paper was the hinge on which kind of whether we're going to have law reform or not. And so we created this and we followed him around to events that he was speaking at. And we said to him, listen, we called the Ministry of Justice and no one was answering the phone. And we were really, really worried. And so we went to the offices and this is what we found. And we were just worried about you and your guys because you guys are working hard and like we just needed you to see this. And needless to say, we got this paper released within the year, something that we'd been writing to them for like 10 years to release. This intervention, which was a humorous one, was something that got us what we needed. So there's room to be seriously funny. Another thing, creative activism, lesson I've learned, demonstrate reality. I think the Cape Townian, anyone who spent time in Cape Town here will know that we call demonstration, it comes from a word, it comes from demonstrate. And we've often forgot that, because here there's marches to Parliament every 2 seconds. Like, we love to march to Parliament to hand over a memorandum of demands. It's our go-to. When was the last time this worked? I don't know. But we still, when in doubt, we march to Parliament and we hand over a memorandum of demands. God, there was a protest happening the other day outside Parliament, and I was driving by.
Now shut down. It's too expensive to live in South Africa, so we're marching to Parliament. Literally, I'm right here. I saw them just the other day. That's so funny.
And I saw another protest outside Parliament the other day. And what you do is, when you drive past, you hoot. You're meant to hoot and toot your car in solidarity. And I really wanted to, but I couldn't figure out what they were protesting. So I was like, I'm not going to hoot, because you could be a bunch of white supremacists. I don't know. So this is something we forget sometimes, that we need to demonstrate reality, to show people so that they can have that feeling, that they can have that experiential feeling that is going to move them to change the way they think or change the way that they behave. This is something we did at the AIDS conference, because in South Africa, we have this ludicrous thing where the police arrest you for having too many condoms and use it as evidence of sex work. It's ridiculous. So these are my colleagues, and we basically went around, and it's an HIV conference. Of course, everyone had condoms, and we just went around arresting people and then explaining to them why they're in jail, why they've been arrested, and that this is actually part of how the law is done in South Africa. And for me, this intervention did so much more for people really understanding the impact and the implications of this ludicrous law than it would have been if I just told them about it, or if I just gave them a pamphlet to say, this is what happens. So for us, it's about, how do we demonstrate that reality? How do we show them and make people feel what we feel? This idea of pop culture, I know often we poo-poo pop culture. I do often, I'm guilty of it. I poo-poo pop culture, but we must use it. It's pop culture for a reason. It's popular. There's aspects of it that are sticky in terms of how our culture, and what are the things we can use. I mean, that is, yes, that's Charlize Theron. She was one of the speakers who didn't mention sex work and got shamed, and came to us and apologized and was mortified, and has now changed her view. We do fun things like talk shows, and like thinking about what popular culture is, whether it's graffiti, what are elements of pop culture we can use. This was an inspiration from a Southern American sex worker campaign, where it's on a street corner. So on the one side, you see the stereotypical image of what you think a sex worker might look like, and on the other side, really trying to counter the stereotype about why people do sex work. And more often than not, it is about supporting adult and child dependence. So really trying to shift how people think about the sex industry by using things like pop culture. Signs, symbols, and spectacle. We know these are useful things in our narrative work. Sometimes a sign or a symbol says so much more, so quicker than anything else. Think about the red ribbon. When people see a red ribbon, they know exactly what it means. Right now, if people see a green bandana, they know it means the fight for access to termination of pregnancy in Argentina. Like, all they need to see is a green bandana, and it says so much. So thinking about how we use these things, how do we create signs and symbols and spectacle? Because these are all really important ways of getting our message across, then getting those feelings where people feel things. So now the red umbrella is a symbol of sex worker activism for us. When people see a red umbrella, they're starting to know what it means. It's not common knowledge yet, but it's getting there. This idea that style matters. I mean, our Cape Town people will know that we partner with Stripper Oki, these bunch of really awesome university people that do events with karaoke and stripping. That is just so much fun and awesome. And thinking about style and being cool, because these are things that are useful in the current world. And I think this for me is my biggest lesson in creative activism, is we're very good at saying what we're against. As activists, I can testify to that. We are very good at saying what we're against. We are not very good at saying what we're for. And we're even worse at describing what we're for in like detail. Like, we want this future. Okay, we want freedom. Fantastic. What does it smell like? What does it taste like? What does it feel like? Because if we can get people to buy into that, that's our job done. So when we're thinking about our interventions to change the world, how are we imagining that world, and how are we showing people what that world might be like? Because that will do half the work for us. And this is what we did in the last general election. We ran a fake election. We created a fake political party, but we ran it as if it was a real political party. So it was called SWAG, the Sex Worker Action Group. And this is Duduzile Dlamini. She is the advocacy manager at SWET. And we had a wonderful campaign video with your vote, your freedom, your swag. And people believed it. They believed that this was a real political party running an election, and we want a sex worker president. And it was quite a cheap campaign to run, because social media fake news and all that. But we did simple things, like we created like a magnet with our swag logo. And when Dudu needed to go anywhere, we called an Uber Black, and then we put we asked the Uber driver, can we put this magnet on your car and make it look like a politician's car? And they said, sure. And Dudu would roll up to this event in a swanky car with swag on the side. And it was, people say, for why? And this came about because it was nearing election time, and I was sitting with a whole bunch of colleagues who work on different issues. So access to education, refugee rights. And a lot of people were saying, oof, elections, we're not going to do anything because we need to wait for the dust to settle. Like, there's just too much media noise. It's not worth putting in the effort because there's going to be an election, there's going to be a change in posts and cabinet, and you'll just have to start all over again. It's not, let's just wait and not launch any campaigns till after the election. And we were like, surely there's an opportunity here. And this was an incredible opportunity for us, because we got to test so many things. Number one, we thought there was going to be a huge backlash against us. And of course, there was your usual little bits of backlash. But actually, the majority of people were in support. And this surprised us. We didn't expect it. And it made us realize that people have an appetite, or having an appetite for something different, and are sick of what is being offered at the moment. And so that was amazing for us. It also resulted in our two largest opposition parties putting sex worker rights in their election manifestos, which has never before ever happened. And that was due to this kind of fake kind of election campaign. Did we get a lot of flack on the day when people went into the polling booths and realized that it was not real? Yes, we did. But it provided us an opportunity to talk about why it should be real, and why it could be real, and why actually this is a future we could have. But it was about painting that future and showing people what that future could be, and being like, yeah, this would be amazing, imagine. And then people can get behind that. So this was our attempt at kind of prefiguring the future. Another thing is this. This was when people said, no, but how does creative activism help with like serious things like funding? Like, funding is like serious grown-up things, and like, what's all this play and fun? Like, how is this going to help us in our serious work of activism, like raising funds? And so we took that challenge on, and we said, okay, well, our rule to brainstorming is, when you brainstorm, you have to come up with at least 10 ideas. 7 of them need to be impossible. 3 of them can be possible. And then we need to pick some of the impossible ones and try and do them. And so we were brainstorming for the AIDS conference, and someone said, I have an impossible idea. I want to meet Sir Elton John. And I said, why? Like, oh no, I really like his music. I was like, okay, fine. let's roll. Let's meet Sir Elton John because you like his music. I do have a suggestion why it's another good reason to meet him. He had just started funding in South Africa. He supports sex worker rights. Maybe that's a good reason as well to meet him. So we started brainstorming ideas. And it was all kinds of like Ocean's 11 capers. We were going to break into the hotel. We're going to steal kind of the maids' outfits and dress up and all sorts of things. And we carried on. And then we were like, how do you get a famous person in a room? Like someone whose PAs have PAs. And we said, an award. Surely he has to pitch up if we give him an award. So we're like, okay, let's invent an award. And so we invented an award, the Asijiki Award for Courage and Initiative. And we decided that Sir Elton John was going to get this. And we just harassed his people to say, this prestigious award, it's never been given before. The sex workers of South Africa really want to honor Sir Elton John. And his people said yes. Our small little organization said yes, okay, we shall meet. And then we realized, shit, this man has Grammys and Tonys and things. And so we actually had to make an award. And so we made an award. And you'll see here in this picture is Sir Elton John with Pamela Chakuvinga, who is the Sisonke deputy coordinator, and Constance Mate, who is the Asijiki coordinator. And I said, shake his hand, and do not let go until you've told them everything you need to know about Sisonke. And so for us, this is a great example about when people say, but like this fun, what else can it be? It can be used for anything. It can be used for any kind of change, because what it really relies upon is connection and relationships and getting people to feel something, because that's the first step into getting them to change their behavior or their way to talk, the way of doing things. And then finally, creative collaborations. Like, we're not in this alone. So we've done an amazing array of work to change how media perceives sex work through artists. And this is on the left, you have the Sex Worker Theatre. We've done some partnerships with kind of international artists, with local artists, for all sorts of things, because we know how important art is for narrative and cultural shifts. So why do we do this? I think they're more effective. There's research that shows it's more effective. We want to be more effective. It's more fun. I think let's not take that too lightly. Life can often be not fun. And so anything that is fun and energizes people and organizations, I say, why not? This makes people, it's cheaper and thrives in the contemporary landscape. If you think about the sign, the countdown clock, that was a clock we made, and it did way more than if we organized a mass protest or mass march, which would have taken so much time and energy and possibly not been as effective. It creates openings. It's far more accessible. It stimulates a culture of creativity, which I think is always a good thing. It can be applied to direct action, but also other types of advocacy. Like, some of the most creative people I know are lawyers. Like, they have to be creative with the law. There's ways of applying creativity to any type of kind of advocacy or change. And then my biggest takeaway is always, you don't have to do everything yourself. I often talk to people about creative activism and they're like, oh shit, I'm overworked and underpaid. And now you're telling me I also now have to be creative. No, you don't. Like what I was saying earlier, there are people who are creative. Invite them to your meetings. Next time you're having a brainstorm, next time you're thinking, planning an intervention, think about who else you could put in that room. Think about who else are like interesting people, not necessarily in your ecosystem or in your sector, that could offer you a fresh insight and approach to the work that you're doing. I sometimes do comms training with people, and I call up my 70-year-old mother and I'm like, explain your message to my mother. And if she doesn't understand it, then the problem was with your comms. It's not with my mother. Like, you need to be able to write comms in a way that is accessible. And so I just called my mother. Like, that helps. So think about who else could be in the room to make your life easier. What are the different collaborations you can look at, who is not in the room and could be in the room and would be fun to have in the room. So in a nutshell, that was like a whirlwind tour of like creative activism in the world of sex work in South Africa. And some of the experiments that we tried, some of them worked, some of them don't. Most of them worked actually to a certain degree. Some of them worked really well. But yeah, that's it. That's all I got. It's all I got.
All the excitement, I'm sitting here collapse. I'm like, yes, go touch them on their studio. I really love that one about being seriously funny. Touch people on their studio. Let them get emotional. Must be inside. Oh, Ishtar, thank you so much. I have so many things I want to say, but colleagues.
Anything, any questions? I don't know. I might not be able to answer them. Any insights?
So while people are still thinking, other thing that sat with me was this thing of moving past the point of critique, that because we do that really well, right? And showing the world what the new world looks like. And it reminded me of something my aunt said to me. I was busy dealing with imposter syndrome. It's just like, no, you must go and be great, because other people will only get to see greatness through you. So if you don't accept the calling, you're denying other people as well. So this thing about live the world, be the change you want to.
I got to think. This book is awesome. It's called Octavia's Brood, and it's edited by Adrienne Marie Brown and Walida Imarisha. And what they did was they went around to different social justice, environmental rights activist groups, and they taught science fiction writing. And so they produced a whole book of like sci-fi short stories, because it was that challenge, like paint this world, show this world. And it's a collection, and because it's written by activists, some of them are terrible, but some of them are and some of them are magnificent. But what it really does is it tests us. It makes us go, okay, we want a new world. Let's
paint it. What does it look like? Yeah.
And it's so funny because, especially because we do such siloed kind of identity-based kind of politics and activism, there's an exercise that I do with a lot of activists called Imagining Utopia, where I push people to imagine and paint these realities. And you sit with people who are animal rights activists, refugee rights activists, sex worker rights activists, all in the same room. And at the end of the day, they all end up painting a very, very similar picture of what this world could look like, could be like, could feel like. And it's just really eye-opening that actually, if we do better in kind of creating these worlds, we'd actually find so many points of overlap and connection.
100%.
Amanda.
Yes.
It's not a question, maybe a comment. I feel like you've made me deeply sad, Ishtar, but I'm sad about everything today, so it's fine. And very nostalgic because I can't remember. I can. Fun, like getting involved in something and feeling joy and fun, and it just reminds me of the campaign and how fun that work was, like serious but fun, and I laughed every day, most of the day, and we used to paint and have ridiculous conversations, and I cannot remember when last I felt joy in the work. So
Oh,
it's
baby.
wonderful to remember. I feel like I come here every week and I'm like, I'm so sad.
But can I tell you now, you people are the reason why I have joy in my work. See, this energy is because of you people. Let me tell you, because of you.
And how important joy is, the way you pointed that out, that the work seriously fun, like that sort of juxtaposition of the two words, and how important it is to have fun with it and how that inspires. It's really beautiful. I'm a futurist. I've always painting the future is what I love to do. And guerrilla futures is my favorite, where you similar to what you're doing, where you really just make it an experience, whether it's theater or art or whatever it might be, but that visceral lived notion of what do the futures feel like, because we can't get out of the tyranny of the present unless we allow all of our senses to engage. So, yeah.
One of my work colleagues who I work a lot with, she's a futurist, and she pushes me and my imagination to like
Yes.
the different futures and not to have judgment about it. Like
Yes.
she paints scenarios and she's like, and it's so funny when people see immediately a scenario that she's painted of the future, steeped in trends that are happening now. They immediately go to dystopia or utopia, and you're like, no, it's neither. This is one possible future, and the idea of kind of projecting and creating that future so you can then kind of change how you are now.
Exactly.
Is awesome.
Yeah.
The future. Oh, that's so exciting. We're manifesting.
Absolutely.
We're manifesting. Oh, what was that? Oh, there was something that you said also, Ishtar, that stuck with me. You said a lot of things today, girl. You fuck outside yourself in my spirit. But one of the things was this thing of having long-term vision and not just once-off iterations, right? And I wrote here, what do you say? Not just once off something. You said something that made me write here, the politics of performance and the performance of politics. Yeah. In the activism work that we do, there was a lot of that in Fees Must Fall. Most of it was performance, because all of them are now in government. They are now in the system. They were trying to bring down, okay, getting paid these nice big parliamentary monies. So I think for me, or a question or something I've been sitting with, like, how do you ascertain, I mean, if that's even something that you can do, how do you tell if someone is doing it for the performance or for the actual politics, like the praxis, you know, how do you tell the difference? Because they're one and the same sometimes, you know?
Yeah, I don't know whether there's a checkbox to be like, are you performing or not? Do you feel this true in your heart? No, you don't.
Or not.
But like often if you can scratch beneath the surface, I think for me, it's like, yeah, for me, my creative activism is just a tool in a greater advocacy toolbox that I have and that I use. And so we have a strategy. This is the change we want to see, and these are the different things that work concurrently. So it's not making a performance for performance sake. We're very clear about what it is we want to get out of it. What is the actual real tangible change we want to see? What is the impact we want to have? And the thing is, I'm going to talk boring metrics and M&E, monitoring and evaluation now. The work we're trying to do and the changing hearts and minds stuff, like, how do we know we're doing it? How do we know we're winning? So for me, it's about like, how do we figure out different ways? Because I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because we know monitoring and evaluation has very problematic histories and politics around how activism is done, how measurement is done, and it's deeply problematic. But so most of those frameworks are bullshit, but I still want to be able to measure whether I'm making a change, because how else am I going to pivot? How else am I going to change my tactics if I don't know? And so I think the duty is on us to also develop our own ways of measuring change. For example, we have a lobbying strategy. We do a lot of lobbying, and funders and donors want to use as a measure of whether we're doing good lobbying or not. How many meetings did you have with the deputy minister? I've had 5 million meetings with him. That doesn't make him like me anymore. Like, it's not, I can meet with him, sure. And so what we started doing is creating our own metrics. And for us, we realized for lobbying, it's about the depth of relationship. So how do we measure the depth of relationship? Do we have their personal cell phone number? Do they read the things we give them? Do they let us know about things before they happen? Like, these then became our tools. Yeah, we gave the donors I had these many meetings, but we're like, that's not what we're interested in. We're interested in the depth of relationship, and we need to create our own metrics to monitor that. the Center for Artistic Activism is also currently doing some interesting things around, does creative activism work? And one of the founders, Steve, is doing some really cool research around body language. And so measuring body language before, during, and after a workshop, and using body language as a sign of like, did we make people feel different? Do they feel different about themselves? I'm trying to think about, like, in my history, in my youth, all the gender empowerment workshops we did to like empower the woman and the girl child. You know, we love to do these things. How do we know? How do we know it works? Imagine if we could come up with metrics to say, okay, in the beginning of the workshop and the end of the workshop, how were the participants' body language? Because that says so much about how someone thinks about themselves or feels about themselves. That could be a cool metric. So I think it's also up to us to be creative and apply our creative spirit to everything, including monitoring, evaluation, and learning.
Gosh, but I just made a comment that also being open to the pivot once the information came back, right? So I'll say, just to share an anecdote, I used to work at the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation here in Cape Town. So they came out of our TRC process, you know this. And so they had been having these reconciliation conversations in all these different communities since 96, yeah? 2017, they're now publishing 21 years of research into these deep and sustained dialogues around reconciliation in South Africa. That is now when Shanti joins. I'm fresh from Fees Must Fall. What is the main finding? That reconciliation has not and does not work in South Africa because white people cannot have conversations on an equal level with people of color in this country. Reconciliation is something that Blacks, coloreds, Indians are talking about, but the white people are not involved. So therefore, this thing isn't working. We need to start looking at restitution. Do they not publish that finding because they would lose their funding? It called the whole institute into question that if reconciliation doesn't work in this country, how can we be the Institute for Reconciliation and Justice? So they just didn't publish the finding. They did not.
Because it would require a rebrand.
But I was just like, but you're lying to people. You can't continue having the same conversations when you know it doesn't work. And they were just, guys, social justice is wild. I was just like, so the thing about controlling narratives, they did not publish the finding till today. Till today, the IGR is not telling you what their research has shown. And that's just painful. I forgot what you were saying now, but I wanted to share that. Thanks.
You should use creative activism to make that known.
Ooh,
There you go. Nejma.
Yeah, that's interesting. Oh my God, thank you, Ishtar, first. This was amazing. And I felt so much when Amanda said that because I was feeling that too. I was like, oh man, just right in the mud, right? But I wanted to just share what Ashanti was talking about the reconciliation, which sort of circles back into, you know, like touching people's like emotional, or like being more visceral about, you know, these realities. And one of the situations that we have here with reconciliation is, it's actually called like truth and reconciliation. And I'm always sort of walking around being like, but everybody's talking about reconciliation. I'm like, yeah, but the truth, you got to do the truth first, right? We got to talk about the truth, right? And how it has affected historically everybody, right? Essentially, in these different ways. And I find it really interesting that the system always wants to go to reconciliation first. And try to fix the problem versus actually like feeling it right first. So thanks for the reminder of that. I think I spend a lot of time doing this, is trying to, talking about intrinsic value, just trying to bring people sort of down from this human system that they're like roiling around in their heads and such, just to even have a conversation, right? To start to start a conversation from a place. But yeah, I just wanted to share that. Thanks again for this. It was really amazing to hear you and your work.
Thanks. I'm just thinking about the truth will not set us free. The truth needs help because everyone will come with their truth. And it is those connections and relationships that I think for me have been the most impactful. I am a big fan of Adrienne Marie Brown and her book, Emergent Strategy. And one of my favorite ones was like pearls of wisdom. Two pearls of wisdom that I always take out of that book is, number one, what you pay attention to grows. So whatever it is you pay attention to, that is what will grow, whether it be negative or positive. And the second one, small is good. And so often in our work, we forget that because we want scale, because we must scale things. And I'm just thinking about something that happened that for us was so small, but so big. And it was built around relationships. We were in Parliament, and one of the members of Parliament used the term prostitute. And before we could do anything or say anything, another member of Parliament nudged him and was like, we don't use that word anymore. Sex work. We don't say prostitute. And for us, this was huge because we're changing the language that Parliament uses in our work. This is unheard of. And why did that change happen? That change happened not because there was some parliamentary wide policy saying we will now be using this word and not this word. It was because we were getting to know people, and like, he had probably encountered one of us or Dudu or someone in the halls of Parliament and had used the term prostitute, and someone said, that is a really derogatory term. I would prefer the term sex worker. Here is why, A, B, and C. And that moment of connection changed it so that it made our life easier because we stopped having to correct people, and it came from peers correcting each other. And suddenly, voila, we changed language in Parliament. And that for me was a really good example of human relationships and intimacy and being able to have those conversations, but also how small is good. Like, let's not underestimate small in terms of impact. Like, we can talk about scale in other ways.
Just to thread so many of the things you've been sharing, I'm thinking about how culture change so often is subterranean. So it's happening below the surface. And that relates to what you're speaking to around metrics, that we have to start to sense into these things like behavior, posture, emotion, things that don't necessarily land in metrics usually. And then it can happen overnight so that, suddenly someone is using the new word and then that spreads like wildfire. And I think that speaks to your touching on joy and the need for joy, because this work can sometimes feel like we're not making a difference. And so you need to have fun along the way to be able to sustain. And it brings everyone along so much better. That was so beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we're on the hour now. So any last comments before we have to go? Oh, if not, my comment, you are amazing, Kel.
Yes, you are
Massive
amazing. Thank
energy.
you.
I don't know where you are, but you gave me all the energy. Let me tell you.
I'm probably
Exciting.
around the corner from you. I'm in Woodstock.
Oh, okay. No, it's nice. We must do something. I want to talk to you about something.
Well, you have my details. I am here.
Any
Thank
closing thoughts or comments before we sign off?
Mhm.
Nothing. What a cool group. And feel free to share my details. Amanda, we must talk. We must bring joy. We need to
Yes.
bring joy back into the activism. It's time.
Amanda needs to move to Cape Town. That's what you need to do.
I'm not sure.
Yeah. But feel free to reach out if you want any information or be put in contact with anything. I don't know. Yeah, whatever. Find
Thank
me.
you so much. I'll make sure to share your details with the team.
Cool.
All right, beloveds.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Aubrey, thank you for waking up at 5 a.m.
Of course.
Sure.
Best way to start a day.
It was nice to
Wonderful.
see you, Ishtar.